Conversations across time. 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 Across time. Conversations 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 across time. Conversations.
This week's episode of Conversation brings back together again Lyndon Baines Johnson, President of the United States, Queen Esther of Persia, and Spartacus. They will continue their vigorous debate about helping the oppressed and how Queen Esther saved the people of Persia, the Jewish people of Persia.
Welcome to Conversations Across Time, the television show that allows you, the viewer, to observe imaginary conversations between historical personalities. And tonight we have, and when I say we, my co-host, as always, who's ever present, is former state representative Babette Josephs. Babette, welcome. We are here once again, and we're going to take up this conversation with these very interesting
Very
people.
happy to be part of it.
I'm so happy that you're always here. You sort of keep us balanced. Seated next to Babette is Spartacus. Welcome once again, General Spartacus.
I'm not a general, but thank you.
Seated next to Spartacus is once again Queen Esther. Welcome, Queen Esther.
Thank you kindly. It's lovely to be here yet again.
Thank you. And seated next to Queen Esther is President Lyndon Johnson. Thank you once again for joining us, President Johnson.
Pleasure's all mine, ma'am.
Now, I thought it was interesting, Spartacus, when you corrected me that you are not a general. I think part of what's most exciting and interesting to me about your particular history is that you were born in Thrace, and Thrace would be, in today's world, Thrace would be Bulgaria. And it's particularly interesting that your background was that you were once a free man, then a soldier, and then a gladiator. Well, I'm sorry, then a soldier, then a slave who was made to be a gladiator. You led 70,000 men. You led a revolt in which you got slaves who were enslaved as gladiators with you to break out of the school where you were held. And that became a sizable army when other slaves started to join. And at that time, as we said last week, 1 in 3 persons in Rome were slaves. So we can understand how threatening that army must have been. But what is also interesting is the Roman Empire. You took on the Roman Empire. At that time...
And did a good job of almost beating them.
And beat them in several battles, in several decisive battles. Your background as a Roman soldier is probably what allowed you to train this group of slaves and former gladiators to actually be a military force, but your specialty was guerrilla warfare. And you almost beat the Roman Empire, and you became such a threat to them that, initially, they thought that it would be easy enough to quell this rebellion, and with 3,000 slaves, former slaves, you defeated the Roman army. Not the entire Roman army, but the army, because see, Italy, which is where you were enslaved, was considered safe, so the Roman army was busy off conquering new territories. They thought that home was safe.
that you must understand that we did not beat the Roman Empire, nor did we take on the Roman Empire. The events you speak of are really a necessary consequence of the situation in which we found ourselves.
Explain,
You see,
please.
everywhere in the world, men and women alike, I suppose, at least as much as men, want to be free. And so, that small number of us who took up kitchen knives to conquer the people who were holding us and training us in preparation for violent, bloody death, we weren't doing anything special, really. We weren't an army. Each man there was fighting for himself more than for anything else. It just happened that because of our condition, each of us fighting for ourselves was, by extension, fighting for all of the others, because the same people who enslaved each of us individually had enslaved us collectively.
Is that different from most wars of rebellion? I would think that that's...
But the difference is simple. When people think about wars of rebellion and revolutions, there's usually some higher goal in mind, some fancy words for liberty, for liberation, for...
Certainly we did when we broke away from
But
Britain, the French.
we were men. We were men in a slave camp. There was no...
Well, because what I find, something that I think is sort of glossed over with this, gladiator school, you were actually being trained to fight each other for the amusement of wealthy people, to fight each other to the death for the amusement of wealthy people.
We found it much less amusing.
Of course.
One would think so.
Yes,
Yes,
of course.
absolutely.
And I think when you say we were fighting for our freedom, yes, because not just were you slaves, but in some twisted sense of what would be called entertainment for the elite of the Roman Empire, they were amused by watching the slaves fight each other to the death. That was their form of entertainment. And so I get it that yes, your rebellion was decidedly different from fighting for some high ideal. You were fighting to be free.
Well,
Even freedom is such an abstract idea in the way that you're describing it. We wanted, more than anything else, to not be forced to kill each other. That's freedom. This freedom is an abstraction.
I understand.
It's no more complex than wanting to go home at the end of a day.
right.
It's very simple. And so to describe it as us taking on the Roman army, it's...
But that's what happened.
I mean, that was the...
Well, if they hadn't continued to try to stop us from going
Right.
home, we wouldn't have fought anyone. It's
Right, but
nothing...
they had to because they were afraid it was going to spread.
Yeah.
It was going to spread because Rome had to fall. These are such fancy ways of saying such simple things. We had no choices. We had no
And they felt that they
self-determination.
didn't have any choices either. So there you were, fighting an army.
Let's say something that was interesting. Had you proceeded north, because I mean, your idea was to just get out of Italy, and you wanted to cross the Alps, and the idea of the people from Gaul would return to Gaul, to their home. People that were Germans, because this was a diverse band that you led. The people that were from Germany could return to their home place. All you wanted to do was for people to return home.
That's an oversimplification.
Okay.
For each of us, we're all driven by our own motivations, and
are you referring to Crixus now?
I imagine that every man who fought by my side had his own idea of what he wanted to do. So for some it was home, for some it was a farm.
Always
I
true,
myself,
isn't it?
I wanted goats. All I wanted to do was find a wife or three, several, and several goats, or more goats, more wives. Either way, as long as there's several.
But see, what a lot of people don't understand about that group, about that army, about that force. You were headed north, and one of the men who was a part of your organization, Crixus, was interested in staying in Italy and plundering the Romans. And
plunder can be rewarding.
well, yeah, but I think that's one of the things that created the problem, because 20,000 people you had an army that got to the numbers of 100,000. 20,000 of those left with Crixus because they thought it made more sense to plunder Rome, when in fact, as you said, all you wanted were goats. Everyone wanted something. But the reality is, had you continued north, history would be different. Also, when you were cornered in the heel of Italy, if the Turks, who you had negotiated with to take your troops to Sicily, 5 miles away, if in fact they had lived up to their end of the bargain, you and your army would have escaped to Sicily. So I guess what I think is important about this is what a man will do when they're forced to do it. And in this sense, you were dehumanized by having to fight men that you were in school with, that you were training with, to the death. And that's a different sort of notion than Queen Esther was faced with. Queen Esther was a part of a population that were second-class citizens who were also going to be annihilated, but annihilated by someone who ultimately, Haman, who was your husband's assistant, and who ended up being hanged by your husband for his treachery. But Haman wanted to annihilate the Jewish population.
But in the meantime, the Jewish population was allowed to uprise. They were supplied with arms to defend themselves. That was what you got out of the king. And it was almost the same kind of army, mass situation, mass rebellion that Spartacus was involved in. And then we have Johnson,
Yes,
who
madam.
tried to make sure this didn't happen in this country.
there-
I
Yes?
truly, excuse me, sir, excuse me, Mr. Spartacus, but I truly appreciate what Mr. Spartacus went through, in a sense, as a teacher in the Catullus High School and the Pearsall High School. I could not help but notice the young children in poverty, many of them Mexican, and these were children I was taught to despise as of a lesser race. And for some reason, I was able to overcome that.
Well, you had intelligence, I would say.
Thank you, madam. And I would say that,
Intelligence never stopped a man from being morally corrupt.
yes,
And so let me just say
Real
this.
as I may
Intelligence.
say,
Real intelligence.
as I may say, ladies and gentlemen, to notice their despair, to notice the lack of hope they would have, it would drive them either to crime or revolution and totally destroy the country.
Now President Johnson, you know, we have some constraints here. And so we're going to pick this up when we come back from break. We have to take a break. But I do want you to talk about that when we come back.
Very good, ma'am.
So what Conversations Across Time is, we take actors playing historical characters, and we have Babette and myself, and we ask them questions, and we mix the time periods. So that's why the title, Conversations Across Time. So we may have Frederick Douglass having a conversation with Eleanor Roosevelt. This brings an interesting twist, and it gets you to know both of those personalities. So we're very excited about this, and we try to put people together that everyone would be surprised about. So we do Thomas Jefferson and Josephine Baker. I'm thinking we've done Abraham Lincoln, for instance, with Eleanor Roosevelt and Frederick Douglass. We also are doing Woodrow Wilson and a good German, and we're going to talk about how World War II came about, because the Treaty of Versailles was very instrumental in bringing about the hatred that Germany had and the feeling of regret that they had, and that's why Hitler could come to power. So we talk about history from a standpoint that makes it interesting, and we do hope that you enjoy us. It's controversial, it's not a polite conversation, it's just people going at it and discussing ideas, and we leave you to make your own judgments about what could have happened, and also about the events that have happened, to allow you to put them in perspective. I hope you join us for Conversations Across Time. It's an idea that has been germinating for a long time, and I believe there's something for everyone. It's education and entertainment. Welcome back. Right before the break, President Johnson was explaining something about his history and how that led him to accomplish or to put forth the type of legislation that he did. And I'd like you to pick up on that again. You taught, and primarily you were teaching Mexican children. And this was in East Texas, is that correct?
That is correct, madam, at the Sam Houston High School in Cotula and the Pearsall High School in Pearsall, Texas. And my memories of these children, knowing that because of their poverty and because of their race, the doors of opportunity, such as college, would be closed to them. As I recall it now, it's a very despairing situation. And one can only imagine how it could affect people, their thinking, how they react to their society, to each other, to themselves.
Now, I want to ask a question about that.
Yes, ma'am.
Because we are, those of us that study history, as we all do, but those of us that are really inclined to study history, and your history in particular, realize that you were able to accomplish so much. And there was a time in which, in fact, many African American leaders weren't sure that you were a friend.
That is true, madam. I have been in contact with Mr. Roy Wilkins of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and I have understood that he was not sure whether I was a friend or an enemy or a neutral.
But was that colored? Okay, was that colored by your need as a political leader to disguise what your agenda was to your fellow politicians? Was that what led you to do that?
Could you elaborate on that, Ben?
I mean that the African American leaders at the time, and Roy Wilkins in particular, I mean, I think there was an interview with Roy Wilkins that happened after you passed the Civil Rights, after you enacted the Civil Rights Act.
That's true.
And he mentioned that he did not know. He met you in, I think, 1956 or 57, and he did not view you as a friend to African Americans. But essentially, you were a friend to minorities in general because of your background in having taught these poor Mexican children. And were you, in fact, in disguise? You were, after all, a Southern Democrat, and I think that what they called at that time the Dixiecrats.
Yes.
So you were a Dixiecrat, and I don't think members of your party understood just how progressive you were.
Yes, it was even a surprise to me, madam, to make that leap, as it were, to finally be in a position to deal with the terrible social issues that this country was facing. And I truly believe that if I wasn't able to address those issues of poverty and race, we would have to be put bluntly, revolution. And I believe that the current situation as we face now, that possibility is rearing its head again.
Yes.
Due to
Let's talk about it.
political short-sightedness.
I agree. I agree. The Republican majority in the House and the minority in the Senate that keeps on proposing filibusters anytime a social program is suggested. Not too long ago, the Republicans in the Senate illustrated again that they are interested in protecting billionaires. They did not want to eliminate loopholes, but when there was talk of student loans being loosened up and student debt, people being helped with their student debt, the Republicans said, oh, we don't have enough money to do that, and every single Democrat voted against the filibuster. 3 Republicans, 2 independents, and they still couldn't break it.
Now, think about that. Think about the revolts that happened with Spartacus, the empowering of the Jews with Queen Esther having been able to get certain extractions from her husband. I view what you did and the policies and the programs that you put in place, I view that as somehow, I believe your predecessor and you had conversations, and certainly they were scuttlebutt in Washington, D.C., that this country was headed in we were on a very precipitous path towards some sort of upheaval. And there had been things that had happened.
Yes, we do have a history in this country of violent upheaval and armed rebellion, as Your Majesty can attest and Mr. Spartacus can attest. When we have come to the realization that when a people are not allowed to advance themselves in terms of education and economic advancement, what have you, and they realize that, to use the phrase, the cards are stacked against them, they feel they have no alternative but to revolt.
Right. When you have nothing to lose, what you always want to do, I would think, if you were in power, whether you were the president or the king, is to make sure all of your subjects, all of your constituents, have something to lose.
That's an important point, but the fact is that if, as you drew a parallel or attempted to, if you want to compare each of these situations to the situation in which the present empire called the United States faces, there's some distinctions that must be made.
Okay.
One, in this slave revolt, of which I took part, that wasn't a revolution. That was an individual situation that exploded and spread.
That's what you call a revolution.
Here's the reason it wasn't a revolution. There was no central theme. Not really. There were individuals who were all oppressed. The only reason that the revolt went as far as it did and had as much success as it did was because we were many former soldiers who had also been trained as gladiators and therefore had had enough experience with killing to be desensitized to it and to actually start the violence necessary. In the situation in which Queen Esther found herself, there was no revolution possible there because the people who were oppressed were not militarized. And in the situation that...
Few in number, I would think, compared to the rest.
Exactly. In the situation which President Johnson diffused by supporting and eventually helping to pass civil rights legislation.
And social policies.
That situation could potentially have turned into a revolution, but it was diffused, preempted by social policy. The situation the United States find themselves in now, at this point, could not foster a revolution for very simple reasons. One, the United States military has been active, but the society at large is not militarized. Every faction that is armed is pitted against another faction ideologically. They don't agree. But revolutions only happen when people find something to agree about, and there just isn't enough yet.
Well, here's what's interesting.
And when they have nothing to lose.
And when they have nothing to lose, what's interesting is this. The powers to be in this country have managed. See, you had a diverse group of people who were oppressed, who decided to do something about it. What happens today in this country is that you have these groups like the Tea Party, like the religious right, which is neither religious or right. You have these people who foster division amongst the oppressed. So in other words, you've got...
They do their darndest. They try.
Yes.
But that's why a revolution is not possible.
Because we are so busy. When I say we, I count myself as amongst those people who suffer as a result of these policies. Mm-hmm. We're so divided. We have this whole notion of people who are against people who have a different lifestyle, different sexual orientations. We are fighting over issues. We're fighting over birth control. I mean,
you know what these people need?
Yes.
They need more goats.
They need more goats.
And wives.
And wives. And wives.
Mostly goats.
But I mean, what's interesting is you've got these people who are victims of oppression. I mean, when I look at the Tea Party crowds, when they show a rally, a Tea Party rally, and I see senior citizens who I know damn well are collecting Social Security.
And they're getting Medicare.
And they're getting Medicare. Some of the things that President Johnson put into place, part of that social network, when I see those kinds of things happening, and here these very people are out there, and they are against the immigrants. They're against the gays. They're against anybody that's not them. They're against the blacks. They're against brown people. They're against yellow people. Anybody that is not their notion of what this country is. So here they are being a party to something that is against their own interests.
That is true, madam. I have seen this several times, that I have been informed many times about rallies of the Ku Klux Klan. Economically, they are no different from black people, but the false notion of superiority due to their skin color has been ingrained in them for generations, and certain political factions like the Republican Party have played on that. And dividing and conquering is, if you'll forgive the cliche, the oldest trick in the book, and instead of attempting to reconcile the white working class people with the black people, the Republican Party has used race to separate white people from black people.
But when people come out and vote in numbers, that doesn't happen.
And we will take this topic up after when we come back. That is such an important thing. That could be the revolution. Not a revolution with weapons, but that could be the revolution. People need to vote. They must vote. We will come back and pick this topic up again. Thank you so much. Okay. We have enjoyed this conversation. We've brought up more questions, and we need to, at least, I want to ask if I can impose upon you to come back again and let us take up this.
Our pleasure.
This would be an honor.
Okay. Thank you so much. This has been Conversations Across Time. Please tune in next week when we again talk to this very interesting panel. Thank you so much.
Conversations across time. 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 Conversations across